What's up guys, how's it going? Welcome to another video here on the channel. Today we're going to talk about the Jonathan Martins case. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do, and don't forget to turn on notifications. Now, without further ado, let's go to the video. Jonathan Martins de Almeida was 29 years old and lived in Uruguaiana, a municipality with more than 120,000 inhabitants, located on the border between the state of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. I didn't find information about Jonathan's childhood or adolescence, as the material available on the internet about the case is very scarce. What is known is that Jonathan was very hardworking and was called Naco or Naquinho by his family and friends. In 2013, Jonathan went to work with his father as a mason on a construction site in the city of Caxias do Sul, and it was there that he met a 51-year-old woman named Leda Natalina Alves Pinheiros. Despite the age difference between them, Jonathan ended up liking Leda, and Leda liking him, and before long, they started a relationship. A few months later, Jonathan's working contract ended, and he had to return to Uruguaiana, while Leda remained in Caxias do Sul. The two kept in touch, and in the midst of their conversation, Jonathan would have told the woman that he decided he would move to Caxias do Sul to live with her. The couple lived for a while in Caxias do Sul, and later moved to Arroio do Sal, a small town with just over 10,000 inhabitants, located on the north coast of the state of Rio Grande do Sul. There, Jonathan got a job at a surveillance company installing home security systems. Although he was physically distant from his family, Jonathan was always in touch with them on the family's WhatsApp group. He was always sending funny stuff and making up conversation. However, on December 18, 2016, Jonathan replied for the last time. The family soon noticed Jonathan's absence and tried to contact him, but without success. With that, the family members decided to get in touch with Leda and asked her why Jonathan didn't respond to their messages and if everything was okay. Leda told them that she had not known anything about Jonathan for a few days, as he had abandoned her to live with another woman. She further stated that he had got into a green car that was waiting for him at the corner of the house when he left with his belongings. Family and friends found the whole story very strange and didn't believe the version given by Leda. They then decided to go to Arroio do Sal, to the house where Jonathan was living with the woman, to see if they could find any clues to the whereabouts of the man. Upon arriving at the house, they saw the motorcycle that Jonathan had bought just a few months ago, and that made their distrust of Leda increase. In January 2017, Leda went to the police station and reported that Jonathan had abandoned his home. However, his family didn't accept this version and filed a missing person report. In the days that followed, family and friends began to spread photos of Jonathan through social media and on missing person search engines. They also started looking for him in various places, such as hospitals, psychiatric wards, and even in the morgues. But despite all this effort, they didn't find any clues about his whereabouts or what would have happened to him. Also in January 2017, Leda met a 43-year-old man named Antonio Lery da Silva. Before long, the two began a relationship, and in the following month, February, they got married. According to sources, the couple continued to live in the same house where Leda lived with Jonathan in Arroio do Sal. The police even started an investigation at the time Jonathan disappeared, but as no clue was found as to his whereabouts, and also no evidence that he had been the victim of a crime, the investigations were ended and the case was closed. Jonathan's family and friends never stopped looking for him and did their best to try to find him, but the truth about what had happened to Jonathan would only come out 4 years later. In November 2020, The police station received an anonymous call that claimed that Leda Natalina Alves Pinheiros took Jonathan's life and hid his body in the house where they lived in Arroyo do Sal. With this new information about the case, the police quickly mobilized and sent teams to Leda's house with the intention of finding any trace that could prove the veracity of the complaint. These teams carried out an investigation of the entire house and at first didn't find anything that could prove that a crime happened there. However, it had now been 4 years, and the police knew that due to the time, it was very unlikely that there was any evidence left in the house. The police then decided to use sniffer dogs trained to locate bodies, and before long, one of these dogs pointed to something that was under the floor of the living room. The agents questioned Leda about what was buried under the floor, but she said she didn't know anything. The concrete floor of the room had to be broken, and after digging a few centimeters, the police found the body in an advanced state of decomposition. For the 4 years that passed, there was supposed to be only the victim's bones, but as the body was under a layer of concrete without contact with the sun, air, humidity, or oxygen, it had its total decomposition delayed. Even if the immediate identification of the victims was not possible, the police suspected that it could be Jonathan Martins de Almeida. Leda was immediately arrested and remained silent throughout. Her husband, Antonio Lery da Silva, was also arrested on suspicion of participating in the crime. After the discovery of the body, a complete expertise was carried out at the place where it was found, and it was discovered that the body had been in the same place since 2016. After that, the body was taken for an autopsy, and according to the coroner, there were fractures in the skull caused by several blows to the head region, and that were probably the cause of death. Still, according to him, some parts of the body had been cut. At that point, the police were almost sure that this body belonged to Jonathan, but only a DNA test could prove whether it was in fact him or not. The test was carried out and the result was positive. The body found actually belonged to Jonathan Martins de Almeida, who disappeared 4 years before. His family and friends were notified by the authorities, and after 4 years of doubt and anguish, they finally learned what had happened to him. At the police station, Leda requested the presence of a lawyer and then decided to confess to the crime. In the first version, she claimed that Jonathan would have come home very drunk after spending the whole night at a bar with friends, and that he would have broken a glass on the kitchen table and then gone on top of her. She then would have grabbed a glass and struck him in the head to defend herself. Jonathan would have gone to the ground, and Leda thought he was just unconscious. But after she realized that she had taken the man's life, she fell into despair. In order not to be arrested, Leda decided to hide the body, and at the time, she buried it in an area that was just a part of the backyard, and that later ended up becoming the living room of the house. This version given by Leda to the investigators didn't convince them, since there were many open points that didn't make sense. The investigations continued, and after a few days, the police got new evidence about the case. Evidence that showed that the version given by Leda was not consistent. Investigators questioned Leda about what actually happened on the day of the crime, and told her that they knew the story she told was false. When Leda saw that there was no point in lying, she decided to tell the truth about the events that led to the crime. According to her, it was late afternoon on December 18, 2016, when she and Jonathan had a strong argument. The reason for the discussion was because Leda suspected that Jonathan had cheated on her, since the man wanted to separate from her and moved on with his life. Leda didn't accept the separation, and when Jonathan stopped arguing with her and sat down to have a beer, she attacked him with a glass, taking the man's life after a struck in the head. With Jonathan already lifeless, Leda cut parts of his body to make it easier to carry. Afterwards, she dug a hole in the backyard and then dragged the body with the help of a rope and buried it. About 2 weeks later, Leda hired a mason to build a room over the grave she had made, thus hiding all traces of the crime. For the next 4 years, the woman lived over Jonathan's body as if nothing had happened, and deep down, she believed she would never be caught. I didn't find information about the person who made the anonymous tip, so it is not known if they were close to Leda or how they found out about something that even the police didn't suspect at the time. On January 19, 2023, Leda Natalina Alves Pinheiros, aged 61, was brought to trial by popular jury. The panel of judges was composed of 5 women and 2 men, and was preceded by Judge Marilde Angelica Weber Goldschmidt. At least 2 witnesses were heard in court, and in her defense, Leda claimed that the crime was an accident and that she had no intention of taking Jonathan's life. Despite these allegations by Leda, the jury was not convinced. The trial was quick, ending the next day, January 20, 2023. In the end, Leda was found guilty of a qualified crime for a futile reason, committed through an appeal that made it difficult for the victim to defend themselves. She was also convicted of concealing a corpse and of ideological falsehood. Leda Natalina Alves Pinheiros received a sentence of 18 years and 10 months of imprisonment in a closed regime, without the right to progression of the sentence in freedom. She is currently incarcerated at the Torres State Women's Prison, located in the municipality of Torres in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. Antonio Lery da Silva, Leda's husband, was also tried on the same day as her. He was accused of complicity in concealing the corpse. However, his defense managed to prove that he still didn't know Leda at the time of the crime, and therefore, he couldn't have been involved in the case. Thus, Antonio was acquitted of all charges, and according to sources, he is still married to Leda. This case had enormous repercussions in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, mainly due to the fact that the author of the crime was a lady who kept a body in her living room, receiving visitors and leaving as if nothing had happened. Alright folks, so that's it for today. Thanks for watching until the end, best wishes, and I see you next time.